We love the trails, but our footprints leave a mark. How do we protect the wild places we run in? I'm Laura Briggs, and this is Storytime with the Green Runners, where we meet trailblazers taking imperfect actions for a healthier planet. This series is entirely supported by our members. If you believe in what we do, please consider joining the Green Runners. For the price of a coffee a month, you can help us work towards a greener future. Find the link in the show notes. Now, let's get into today's story. Today on Storytime, we have three brilliant changemakers who are currently trying to save an entire species by running across Devon whilst carrying very precious cargo. First up, we have Anne-Marie Culhane, an award-winning eco-social artist, activist, and the visionary co-lead of Tidelines. She's spent decades bridging the gap between arts, climate science, and community action, designing rituals that reconnect us to the natural rhythms we've forgotten. Next is Sarah Finch, a director of Tidelines and an internationally recognised climate campaigner. She recently won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize, aka the Green Nobel, for taking a historic multi-year legal battle against oil expansion all the way to the UK Supreme Court and winning. And finally, we have Etienne Stott, MBE. If you watched the London 2012 Olympics, you'll know him. He's the Olympic champion in the C2 Canoe Slalom. He spent years mastering the physical chaos of raging whitewater rivers, but since retiring, he has pivoted that fierce drive into fighting the socio-political current as a prominent climate activist. Welcome, everyone. Anne-Marie, we are going to talk a lot today about the Salmon Run, where runners tackle 43 miles, passing a stuffed salmon called Samantha along those 43 miles in a relay. Where does she actually live when she's not being run down a trail? Does she have her own spot on your sofa, or is she safeguarded like the crown jewels?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, so Samantha is a key element of our event, Salmon Run. And she's the baton. She's symbolic of the whole journey, the whole experience of Salmon Run and of the quest to return to her spawning grounds up the River Exe. And yeah, she lives actually in the room I'm in, which she's got a special plinth display space, which she is attached to for the rest of the year. She's starting to look a bit ragged. She's done 5 trips back from Greenland now up the River Exe. So she's travelling 1,500 miles back from Greenland and then about 45 to 50 miles up the River Exe. So she's a little bit worn, but she's still looking great. She's multicoloured. And on her back, she's got a line which depicts the journey of the river.
Much like the salmon that are actually heading back to their spawning ground, she's also pretty tired, I would say then, but still raring to go, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, that's right. Ready for another year.
My next question is going to go to Sarah. Sarah, firstly, I want to say huge congratulations on winning the Goldman Environmental Prize. Now, you went from standing in the highest courts in the land, dealing with massive legal precedents, to focusing on the local creative flow of Tidelines. Does it feel like a bit of a reality check, going from debating Supreme Court justices to discussing the logistics of transporting a stuffed salmon?
Well, yes and no, because obviously, the ex-riverbanks are very different from the Supreme Court. But those big courtroom moments were kind of few and far between. Over our 5-year legal fight, we had 4 court hearings. And in between those, before those and between those, there was a lot of local event planning, pretty similar. So we had local events to raise awareness and drum up support for our campaign, and then also to raise the funds to pay the legal fees. So there was quite a lot of local event planning. And in fact, the two things kind of ran alongside each other for a while, because I first got involved in the Salmon Run in 2022, the first ever one, when I saw something about it on Facebook and like rang up and volunteered. And at that point, that was when we had lost our case in the Court of Appeal, but we'd got permission to go on to the Supreme Court. So for 2022 to 24, I was both involved in the salmon run and the legal case. And in fact, although we never did anything anywhere near as complicated as a 44-mile relay run, come ultra, come mini festivals along the way like the salmon run is, we did things which were in the same ballpark. We held 2 shale trail walks, which were sort of big group walks between Horse Hill, the oil site that I was fighting, and then another site about 6.5 miles, 10 kilometres away. So we organised like groups, we all walked together, we paused at various points for music. We stopped on a bridge over the local river there, which is the River Mole, looked down at drew inspiration from the river. So the 2 things definitely had elements in common. And I think that's because in any good campaigning, you are marrying science and kind of winning hearts and minds as well. So I think these kind of creative activities, which Tidelines does par excellence, combining art and mass participation and community involvement, are essential alongside something a bit dry like legal fights.
I love that interconnectivity between the two and the kind of the legal fights, but then that real community element that you just talked about. I'm going to ask Etienne now. Etienne, you won an Olympic gold medal in the canoe slalom back in 2012, and now you're supporting this event as an ambassador and speaker. But as someone who spent years reading the deep physics of moving water, do you find yourself looking at the River Exe in a completely different way now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say I do. I mean, first of all, it's worth kind of noting that most Olympic competitions, in fact, all in recent times, have been held on artificial courses, which are very different than, living natural rivers that are, ecosystems in their right. So, when I look at any river, any body of water, I can't help, part of me thinks, oh, I'd like to just go on that just for a little paddle. And I've never paddled down or up the River Exe. So it's certainly, there's a kind of call of just an adventure. There used to be an event on the River Exe that you could go down it, and up now. I would love to paddle on it, and so I see it when I was running up it last year. I just was like, catching a glimpse of it, and that call is still there. But certainly, understanding the plight of the river, and understanding really about the complexity of that ecosystem. I mean, I guess it's not rare to kind of imagine, if you ask someone, they can picture salmon swimming up a river, jumping up, and I guess the classic American, bears trying to grab them and things. But when you actually understand, it was really educational for me to understand, how this ecosystem is really, really important. For example, how the salmon actually transport, chemistry, molecules and atoms from the sea that don't exist inland, all the way up the river to kind of nourish and help the ecosystem, with their bodies, do that. And, that's an amazing thing. And again, I suppose lots of people, I would say, once you start to look closer at things, you start to see the wonder of it, and nature is a wondrous thing. And you start to see this kind of beauty and this intricacy that is really quite hidden. And again, most people will look at a river, they won't even see the salmon very much. If they're lucky, they will, because of course they're a little bit more, they're a lot endangered. So it's very interesting to see this, the change in perspective that occurs as you do this event. And as this event is, kind of designed to bring that change in understanding, so that people think, actually, we need to do something here and work to look after this. And this is, of course, a story that's repeated around our country and around the world, no doubt.
You must be acutely aware of the dwindling health of rivers for exactly this reason, the sport that you're in. Can you take me back to the period right after you retired from elite competition, spending your whole life on wild rivers, winning medals, and suddenly you're standing on a quiet riverbank as a campaigner? Does it feel strange kind of making that transition, or do you feel that being part of environmental advocacy was always kind of part of your calling?
I think a part of it, I mean, I started in the Scouts, and so we were kind of steeped in the outdoors, even though we didn't really realize it at the time. I realize now it was an important part of this. I think that realizing that, for me anyway, this is for me, life is about purpose and meaning and your impact in the world, and that's impact on other people, but also the impact in the world more generally, positive and negative. And, we cannot help but impact the world. We're not made of nothing. We tread on this earth. We use its resources in various amounts, some more than others, and some have more difficulties, and others have more struggles with the consequences of those impacts. So for me, retiring from my sport, I really do see it now. Of course, there was a huge kind of gulf of meaning, purpose, and something to do, which I was prepared for and I had ideas about. I didn't quite end up where I thought I was going to be, but absolutely it makes perfect sense. And for me, it's just an extension and a kind of natural step. And to me, it makes perfect sense. I tell everybody, it's like the most sensible thing any person can do in this time is to try to protect our Earth, our planet, because there is no other place for us, and your entire future, everything you want, everything you wish for other people depends on that. So to me, it's just a really sensible investment in my future, as well as a kind of deeper calling, a sense of purpose derived that, I absolutely had from sport, and which now I take as a very different thing, climate campaigning, activism, advocacy, whichever word, kind of suits. But they are actually very similar in many, many ways. And I find a great deal of, comfort, really, I suppose, in doing what I'm doing. And very lucky, I feel, as usual, very lucky to do what I do.
Well, you're in very good company with that philosophy, I have to say. What was the first clue you got that things beneath the surface of the rivers were actually in a really bad way?
I mean, as a paddler, I say canoeist, kayaking, paddleboarders, you're in the river, you see it, and you can smell it. Sometimes you can taste it. Sometimes you can see it. And if you paddle anywhere regularly, you get the sense. It's just like, walking your dog around the local area. If someone's done something or someone's changed something, if you're observant, you're alive to you're present in your surroundings, which, I think training kind of makes you're present in your body and you're present in your surroundings. You just see. And I guess even when I was quite young, we were training on my river in Bedford, and there was a brewery, and sometimes I think there was something going on with the brewery, and it was a horrendous, like, super strong smell and taste, and it was really nasty. And obviously, if in the winter times, we used to paddle in when it was flooded, and there's some, the first flood of the winter very often, or the first flood after a prolonged dry spell, is nasty. It's full, all the stuff comes down the river. It's grey, it's greasy, it's smelly, and there's all stuff as well, physical stuff in the river. And of course, we trained all the time whenever we needed to. So you just confronted with it and you just see it. And now we really know, there's a painful example for me, the River Wye. That's a place where almost all canoeists and kayakers who ever encountered the sport in this country will go at some point for their introduction to kind of flowing water. And this is a river that's tragically, almost broken because of the weight of chicken farming in that catchment. And so that's a particularly painful kind of connection that I remember. And people, I've not paddled there for years, but people say the river is almost dead. And I suppose for me, that's, we are confronted, and it's just a matter of what you do. And lots of athletes, lots of canoeists and paddle sports, people are passionate people. They care for what they're doing and they do want to see it. And then there's a level of, what you can influence, your own personal actions. And there's also recognizing this is a systemic problem as well. And I guess there's a very, and I say a broadening awareness of the fact that, you can fish out a few things out of your river, but why is it there, and whose responsibility is it that doesn't end up there, and to clean it, and the sewage and all that. I think people are really getting to grips with this nowadays, and there's a lot of pressure in the public space to make our rivers healthy and to make all our water spaces healthy.
I think you're right when you say that public awareness of our water health is certainly growing, and there have been cases which have been taken to the High Court. So I'm going to come back to Sarah with her legal hat on now. Sarah, can you kind of take me to the moment where you're up in the Supreme Courts, you know, fighting against massive fossil fuel interests with a grassroots campaign behind you? What were you thinking? Were you thinking, how on earth have we come to this point?
Yeah, the Supreme Court hearing was definitely one of the surreal moments in the whole journey. Not the only one. But yeah, we started out with that legal case as almost a last resort. We didn't have a big strategy of like, we'll look around for a case and we'll fight, you know, through the courts. It was a last resort when everything else we'd tried to stop this particular oil site in Surrey from developing, we had failed. And so we're like, okay, we'll do a judicial review. So that's a kind of court process where you ask a judge to look at a decision that's been made and see if it was made in accordance with the law. And our whole aim at that point was to get this one site to have its planning permission refused. So that's a site in Surrey where I lived at the time, already producing a small amount of oil under temporary permissions, but they gave them permission to continue for 20 years. We thought, well, that cannot be right in a climate emergency to produce oil for 20 years, which would have produced 10 million tons of carbon dioxide when it was burnt. So that was a simple, like, we just want to get this overturned. We thought, well, maybe it's going to be a 6-month journey. We'll win or we'll lose, and then we'll move on to the next thing. And in fact, it went on for 5 years, but it quickly became clear that it was a national principle. So this failure that we'd identified, that the county council, Surrey County Council, had not looked at the emissions from burning the oil before they gave permission, was actually the norm. And it was happening in much bigger developments as well. I'd say the worst of these surreal moments in the whole process was in 2022, when Michael Gove, who was then the Environment Minister, gave permission for a new coal mine in Cumbria, a giant coal mine. It would have been the first new coal mine in 30 years, like completely backward step. But in his judgment, or in his sort of decision document, he quoted my case. By that point, we'd lost in the High Court, we'd lost in the Court of Appeal, and Michael Gove said, well, this Finch case, as they call it, demonstrates that you don't have to look at the downstream emissions. The coal mine is fine, it can go ahead. So that, at that point, that was a really bad moment. And I thought, we've just made everything worse. We've been naive. This is terrible. But that kind of, well, we really have to keep fighting to turn this around. So then on the opposite to that, the good things that happened when we did win in the Supreme Court, a whole stack of other decisions that had legal challenges kind of pending, waiting to see the outcome of my judgment, they were one by one overturned. So the Whitehaven coal mine permission quashed. The Rosebank giant oil field in the North Sea, it had been permitted by Rishi Sunak, that was quashed as a result of my win. The Jackdaw gas field, and lots of others, sites onshore and offshore. And then it's the ripples just keep going further. So the surreal moments haven't stopped at all. So from basically changing policy on how decisions are made about fossil fuel, it's crept out into other sectors. So including industrial agriculture. Etienne mentioned the horrific impacts of chicken farming on rivers, including the Wye, but many others. And I was just really incredibly proud when application for a farm in Norfolk, which would have seen millions of chickens over a year and tens of thousands of pigs, that got refused, citing my judgment. It was like, well, the Supreme Court says we have to look at all of the impacts of this, not just the impacts like on the site, but all the downstream effects too. So, and then there's been a suite of other judgments about industrial farming. So yeah, the whole thing has been completely surreal. And I still sometimes wonder, did this really happen? Have I just entered a deluded state where I think that me and my friends and fellow campaigners in the Wheeled Action Group have like really changed the law and made the future better? But yeah, it seems we did. And so I am kind of living proof that ordinary people, by banding together and making an effort, can sometimes change things. And of course, that is not guaranteed, and it doesn't always happen. And lots of people have fought really good, really important campaigns and not won. But sometimes you do. So that's why I believe you have to do everything you can. I never set out to be a legal campaigner, not at all. But you just have to try everything, because one of those things will win. And so, yeah, the chat. I'm not moving on. That absolutely. This whole issue now of the emissions from oil and gas is like my life's mission. But there's other important fights as well, like our rivers, which is, as Etienne said, receiving a lot of attention now, and rightly. So it's time for creative activists to do absolutely everything, from legal fights to running up rivers, carrying a stuffed salmon, whatever we can to help our rivers.
Which brings me nicely to the question, Sarah, how do you actually keep your creative energy alive when you're wading through all this bureaucracy? Obviously, dealing with the courts is very different to dealing with community, but you still come up, against that red tape. How do you stay creative?
I just think it's about having other people around you. I think I would have given up long ago if I'd been doing this on my own, because it is very wearing and very tiring, and you have a lot of points where you think, oh, I've made a dreadful mistake, this is never going to work. But it's having other people, and the Wheeled Action Group that I'm part of is like a network of really amazing people with a whole host of different skills and attitudes. And some people, and I'm one of them, a bit nerdy and like reading 90-page documents and spotting the figures that don't add up. But other people have brilliant campaigning ideas. And between you all, when somebody's energy flags, there's going to be someone else who'll come up with another idea. So, yeah, I think community. And I think the fact that I'm now associated with this case as an individual, and, I won the Goldman Prize as an individual, which is a huge honour, and I'm really grateful for those things. But it does somehow sort of perpetuate this myth of like the amazing individual who does things like completely on their own, which is never true. Well, maybe there are rare individuals like that, but I'm not one of them. And I think our strength is in community. I think it's movements of people that bring about change when enough people want something and take action. And so that's really what we're trying to do with the Salmon Run, is just motivate the people who live along the river in the villages and towns to see and understand that there are salmon in the river, or there should be salmon in the river. Because, I'm now like a major salmon evangelist, but when I moved to Exeter, I didn't know there was salmon in the Exe. I didn't know that the name Exe, the name of the river, and the name that our city is based on, means river full of fish. But the salmon is really, really important for our river and our city. And by convincing enough people of this through like putting on amazing events, I hope we can like build that movement for change.
My next question is directed at Anne-Marie, and it comes back to that whole idea of community. You've joined community with creativity and artistic vision, Anne-Marie. And instead of just taking another kind of depressing scientific report on salmon decline, you've turned this event into something very different, which, is very inclusive as well. Can you tell us about the event and how it's structured?
Yeah, so the Salmon Run is actually the name of the run that salmon do. So it's the name given to the process where the salmon returns to their home river. And for people who don't know much about salmon, which may be some of the listeners, the salmon return to their natal river. So they return to the river that they were born in. And they're doing a migration out to probably as far as Greenland. So 1,500 miles out, 1,500 miles back over a few years. So when they start the journey back, they are coming back to their home river, and they're sensing their river through a thing called the lateral line, which ties into the Earth magnetic field, and also through smell. So they smell out their river. So sometimes they'll probably come past Cornwall, come along the Cornish coast, go into a few sort of estuaries, maybe wrong river, and they come along and they end up back in the Exe, and then they run up the river. And we were learning about this when we were learning about our river. We were learning about the history of the Exe. We did a project with the Royal Albert Memorial Museum, who wanted us to think about tides and the connection of Exeter to the tides. And I'm working all the time with climate scientists and scientists at the University of Exeter to sort of really ground the creative work we do in place and in the climate and environmental crisis here right now, and to bring people into those stories in a really living, alive way, in a way that we can make change happen and make things better. And the Salmon just came out as the outright winner in terms of storytelling, in terms of epic journey, in terms of awe and wonder, in terms of critical moments. So like the populations of Atlantic salmon in their range have declined 70% in the last 25 years. And on the Exe, we've gone from being one of the most major salmon rivers in our part of the country to being maybe having fewer than 200 salmon. We don't even know how many are left. We just know there are very, very few. And they face multiple challenges. And I think it's also that fact that when you look at the salmon and they tell us the challenges that they're facing, it can teach us a lot about multiple crises that we face as human beings. So climate change is one of the huge ones, alongside pollution, alongside weirs. So yeah.
So when you think about how we communicate environmental crises, do you think that we rely too much on scary statistics and not enough on those physical shared experiences like this?
I think there needs to be a really it's a tricky balance, because what we're talking about is a deeply terrifying and terrible story of loss. Atlantic salmon have lived in our river before humans got here. They hold the whole ecosystem together, a keystone species. And so that's a tragedy unfolding. At the same time, they remind us how incredible and awesome the ecosystem is. So they bring us alive. They bring us back into connection with all the other parts of the ecosystem. And then you go, I want to look after this. I want to care for this. So we're kind of balancing that grief and loss and that awe and wonder in one event, and also bringing people into connection with each other. And actually what happens in the event is that we run a relay where groups of people, up to 10 people, run one section of the river, and they pass Samantha the salmon baton onto another group. And that goes on 11 times up 44 miles of river, from early in the morning when Samantha comes out of the sea in a ritual to the top of the river in Dulverton, where she reaches her spawning grounds and then disappears off upriver. And we can't see her, and she goes off to spawn. So there's this beautiful linking, connecting that happens through Samantha up the river between communities and different groups. And at the same time, we have an ultra run, which is runners setting off at 8 in the morning. They carry a tiny salmon with them all the way up, a cloth salmon all the way up. Strapped onto their costume or whatever they're wearing for running. They're not wearing costumes, they're running like running gear. And they carry the salmon all the way up, and then they deliver it to the top of the river up 44 miles. And what's lovely is that the relay crosses over with the ultra run. So we have connections between runners as well as between communities, and between, elite runners and people who are just out for a run, just out for a jog.
The logistics, Anne-Marie, of trying to coordinate 11 different relay teams handing over a salmon sounds quite challenging. How do you deal with that?
It is challenging, because we not only do we invite people to run in groups of 10, and often it's with people they don't know, we're also inviting a sort of, I guess, a healthy questioning around why we run and what we're running for. So it's not about a kind of competitive run. This is about a community running, 10 people running as a shoal. So we say, when you run, please run together. And we have to check that people can run at roughly the same pace. Otherwise, that would turn into a nightmare. So when people sign up, we just check that they're running with people of a similar pace. And it's not about, we have trackers, but we don't do timings. If you're doing the ultra, you can obviously be timed. But for everyone else in the relay, it's like, hang on, we're running for something else here. We're running for our community. We're running for our river. We're running for another species. And maybe it just shifts a little bit. It's like, why am I running? What am I getting from the experience of running? And what am I learning about the landscape that I'm running through? Those are all questions that are really important to us.
Etienne, as an ambassador for the run, you are often the person rallying a crowd. So can you give us your best, most enthusiastic megaphone pitch to a bystander who's just stopped you on a bridge to ask why on earth people are running upstream?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I just always say I think it's a really fun and quirky event that brings together all these different layers, and it's about sport. It's about, the action of running, but it's also bringing in all these different elements of art and telling the story of the salmon. It's about protecting. It's about looking at where we are with new eyes and fresh eyes. And it's a very lovely kind of event, bringing all these things together where people will go away kind of nourished and having a new energy. And I think to me, that is a very wonderful thing, because I don't know of many things. In fact, I don't know anything that's like this. It's got so much thought into the different parts and elements that they're all kind of twined together into a kind of like a ribbon. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a metaphor, into a different, a different sort of event. And I think it's really, really cool. And you see some fantastic runners who are like really very, very quick, and there'd be people just people like me who are not very good at running, and all sorts of people just running along, and it's connecting them to a very important and serious thing. And I think that is really, really clever, and credit to everybody involved, because it's a very wonderful mechanism of creating action and change in the world, where we're doing something that's also really cool and interesting as well.
Just staying with you, Etienne, Tidelines has always blended arts and action. Why is it so important to have musicians, family orchestras and performances along the riverbank, rather than just making this a standard serious race, in your opinion?
Well, I think that's what's so good about this event, is because, as we've just sort of briefly touched upon earlier, everyone has a different way of kind of connecting to things, the world and stuff. So for some people, this awful statistic, that there's only 200 left, you could, if they were in one place, you could count them, for some people that's going to bring them in. For other people, they'll hear the music kind of wafting in over the air. Other people will see, the action in the event, people gathering, the last one, Anne-Marie kind of comes out of the sea with the salmon, and, people, it's different ways of striking people and engaging people. And I think that's what's really, really cool and interesting, because you just don't know what everyone's got their like key. And the interesting thing here is that this situation, let's say, of the River Exe is a small piece, but it's also a big, it's a small piece of a very big puzzle, and a big challenge. And people do feel overwhelmed, and also people feel disconnected. It's a very challenging thing that we're engaged in, and this is trying to connect people at the same time as bringing it locally and connecting, what we can do with what's going on out there. And I think that's what's very special about it. And I think it's really nice, very nice and kind of warming effort to kind of create this change, as I said. And I think I really like it. I think it's cool.
And a great way of educating people at different levels, not necessarily just runners, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, because it calls people, the runners will have learned something for sure. Like I say, I don't consider myself all knowing, because there's so much to know, but I learned loads being involved in this. And I think it's interesting. It is a very compelling, I think Anne-Marie said, the summer it's an amazing story. And so there's just this lots of ways of drawing people in. And I think as the salmon enrich the river, the salmon run kind of enriches the community and enriches the fight to protect, what we need, what we love, and what we care about.
I love that. I have to say, I've learned an awful lot about salmon just through the research for this podcast. So the salmon doesn't just swim upstream because it's guaranteed to survive. It swims because it's called to move. So when the scale of the ecological crisis feels completely paralyzing, do you think that the simple act of physically coming together to run through the Devon mud or standing on the banks cheering can give us all the strength to keep going? And I'm going to direct that question firstly at Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm someone who's been prone all my life really to kind of environmental anxiety and sometimes despair, and trying to find things that I can do to help, none of which ever seem big enough. So being part of a campaign group that, won a successful campaign was incredibly motivating. But we never did it, I think, because we thought we would win. I think we were probably all pretty sure we wouldn't, but it's because, if there's something you can do, just do it. And the doing of it in itself makes you feel better. You think, at least I'm doing something, and it brings you into contact with like-minded people. So yeah, I think it's good to have a pinch of optimism, but even on the days when you can't feel like that. And I think anyone who goes around, like, people always talk to me about climate hope, and I kind of think, what hope? We know that the world's heating up, and there's no way we can kind of save the wonderful conditions that we've got right now, but we can make things less worse, or sort of make every degree of warming that we can present, or every fraction of a degree, is worth doing. So yeah, I think doing something rather than nothing immediately makes you feel a whole load better. And doing something like the Salmon Run, which is incredible fun, and you get to spend time with really fun people in a beautiful environment, witnessing all kinds of quirky, amazing things you would never expect. I think that absolutely lifts the spirit. I love the Salmon Run. I've been involved with it every year, sort of in different ways, and I look forward to it. My whole family, who don't even live anywhere near the Exe, they all come down. They love it. It's a beautiful and brilliant event, and it is something that fills you with hope, or not to underplay the dire situation that the salmon's in. But doing this feels like we're doing something.
Same question then to Etienne. Does this kind of event give you the strength you need to keep going, Etienne?
I mean, I think Sarah said very well, and there's great parallels in sport here. Most people, well, let me say, no, that's not many people, elite athletes and athletes just getting into a sport, basically enjoy it, number one, but a lot of the time this idea of winning is very compelling, right? You want to win, you want to compete, and as you battle and you struggle, and again, there's a kind of salmon parallel here, you start to realize it's really tough, and you might not win, and sometimes you win, sometimes it's a long time between wins, and depends, your bar for what counts as a win changes as you get into something. And it's certainly the case with, trying to look after this beautiful home that we have. We encounter incredible pain, basically. You're confronted all the time, everywhere. And it's a bit like when you're training, you're confronted with, basically, you're not very good and you want to be better. And you have to, certainly the process for me is kind of making peace with the fact that you might not get everything that you want. But also there's a great deal of benefit from doing, getting out there, going to the gym, canoeing, same as, getting out there, organizing things, getting people together, figuring out what piece you can play in this, what part you can play. So I would say, yes, this idea of, like, you need to have both. You need to have hope, you need to have a vision, you need to have, and that's beautiful and wonderful. But that can burn you to pieces. You need to focus then your effort on translating that into stuff you can do. Otherwise, you'll just kind of grind yourself to bits. And certainly for me, yeah, anything I'm involved with, anything that I feel is positive, heartfelt, authentic, and true to the proposition of, protecting life on Earth, not for ourselves necessarily, but for others, for all beings. And that, to me, that sounds kind of lofty. That's kind of the idea. But what it means I do is I spend time doing Zoom calls, and I spend time writing things, and I spend time talking to people, and I spend time making banners and things like that. That's translation, and that's the same for me as it was as an athlete. So for me, it's very, very similar. It's just a different thing that I'm doing. And to me, it's really important to get out there and just do whatever you can and be as true to your understanding and true to your aspirations as you possibly can. And that's not an easy path to tread, but the alternative is basically miserable, a bit boring and doesn't make you feel good.
I think having those lofty visions are absolutely imperative, Etienne. Thank you. I'm going to finally come to Anne-Marie, kind of for the last bit of this, which is, I suppose, Anne-Marie, do you think that this is the antidote to ecological paralysis?
I was just thinking about when Etienne and Sarah were answering then about relationship, and I think Salmon Run is about relationship, and I'm passionate in my environmental art and activism about extending our sense of relationship to the wider world and to more than humans. So for me, it's really boring to live in a world that's just got humans in it. We can't do it anyway. Our whole life support system is the ecosystem. So building relationships and reigniting and re-exploring in our communities what those relationships were in the past, what they're going to be in the future, how they're changing, how we're going to need to work with each other and other species as the troubles continue to unfold through climate change and through all the other crises that we've brought to bear as humans. We're living in the 6th mass extinction. So the fact that the salmon are potentially going extinct, one of the things we can do as custodian species, which humans I think should be, is witness that, pay attention to that. And if they do go extinct, then we need to mark that loss and say, we must never let anything like this happen again. But those relationships have to be built between other species and between the people around us. So that's what Salmon Run's trying to do. And those are all really hopeful things. I'm like Sarah, I don't necessarily have hope for the future, but the hope comes from the relationships and the community connections and the connections with other species that we can build when we start to live in more life-affirming ways. And that's really exciting. And I look forward to Salmon Run, even though it's a huge amount of work and a complete logistical nightmare. I love it, and I can't help coming back for more.
It's a hugely important event for so many different reasons, not least to bring that connection again back to humans and to animals and nature. The Salmon Run returns on Saturday, the 19th of September. Whether you enter the full ultra or join a non-competitive relay team, you'll be raising vital awareness for river health and biodiversity. You can enter with a link in the show notes. And if you're a member of the Green Runners, get in touch for an exclusive 20% off code. Just to say thank you ever so much to our guests on Storytime today, Anne-Marie, Etienne and Sarah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Storytime with the Green Runners. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like and share to make sure you never miss a story.